Hi, once again we meet to discuss second language acquisition theories. In this video, we are going to talk about Krashen's monitor theory. What makes Krashen's monitor theory different from previous second language acquisition theories is that it is an attempt to provide a comprehensive account of second language acquisition. It is built on principles that are drawn from different approaches such as behaviorism, innativism, and cognitivism. It is based on the view that learners are responsible for constructing their representation of language and that internal representation of language develops through predictable stages. It also claims that the quality of input is responsible for language development. The monitor theory gives rise to 5 hypotheses which we are going to discuss in the following slides. The first hypothesis is the acquisition versus learning hypothesis. This hypothesis distinguishes between acquisition and learning. It views acquisition and learning as 2 independent and related processes that happen in different contexts using different strategies. In this respect, acquisition refers to the unconscious process through which humans gain and develop the capacity or ability to analyze, understand, and use language. According to Krashen, language acquisition happens when learners are engaged in meaningful interaction in some informal, natural settings where they pay attention to meaning more than form. For instance, Amazigh children usually pick up Arabic while playing with their Arab friends on the street, with no need for teachers to explain the rules and provide feedback. Learning, on the other hand, is a conscious process where learners are totally aware that they are learning a second language. Consequently, they are engaged in the analysis of the input in order to identify language rules and structures as they pay attention to the form of the language. Such kind of processes usually necessitate the presence of a teacher who provides input, explains rules, and gives corrective feedback when necessary. Learning usually happens in formal and natural settings such as classrooms. In Krashen's view, acquisition is more valuable than learning because what we acquire tends to stay longer than what we learn. He also states that learning can never lead to acquisition because the cognitive organizers which are responsible for acquisition are different from the ones which are responsible for learning. This means that second language acquisition teachers should strike a balance between fluency-based activities and accuracy-based activities in order to provide learners with opportunities to promote both learning and acquisition processes. The second hypothesis is the monitor hypothesis. It postulates that language learners are equipped with a device that enables them to edit their language before they speak or write. The monitor is in fact an editor, a controller, and a corrector that checks the appropriateness of language before it is produced. Learners use it differently. In fact, Krashen identifies 3 kinds of learners: monitor over users, monitor under users, and optimal monitor users. Monitor over users are those learners which are preoccupied with the correctness and accuracy of language. They tend to think a lot in order to remember and apply the rules they know when they are speaking. As a result, this affects their performance negatively as they speak very little and hesitate to engage in oral communication because they are afraid of making mistakes. Monitor under users are the opposite. They focus on fluency and meaning and ignore rules. They are careless about forms and structures and rules, and they are not afraid of making mistakes. Most of the time, monitor under users make too many errors that hinder communication. Good learners are optimal monitor users. They try to balance between fluency and accuracy. They are not afraid of making mistakes, but they are careful to avoid mistakes that may cause communication breakdown. Also, optimal monitor users listen to themselves when they are talking and can self-correct when they make an error. What this means for second language teachers is that they should make learners aware that there are situations in which accuracy is needed, such as in writing and in public speaking, and there are situations where fluency is favored, such as in dialogues, conversations, and in note-taking activities. The third hypothesis is the natural order hypothesis. The natural order hypothesis is built on the idea that language learners go through similar stages of acquisition. In this regard, language development happens in predictable stages which do not necessarily respect the simple to complex order. This means that learners will acquire the present continuous, which is a complex form, before they acquire the simple present, which is a simple form, even if the simple present was taught and presented first in the classroom. Krashen attributed this natural order to the cognitive organizers, which are responsible for processing and organizing the language system. In what follows, we'll have a look at some examples of this natural order. For instance, we can see that the present continuous is acquired before the simple present, and that irregular simple past verbs are acquired before regular verb forms. This shows that the order of acquisition does not often respect the logical simple to complex order, but it is a totally natural order. A second language acquisition teacher should expect learners to master different parts of language, though not necessarily in the same order in which they are presented in the textbook or in the curriculum. The fourth hypothesis is the comprehensive input hypothesis. It asserts that learners can acquire language if they are exposed to input that is understandable and comprehensible. Comprehensible input is a necessary condition for language acquisition, and it means that learners should be able to deal with language that is just a little bit beyond their current level. Krashen uses the formula I+1 to stand for comprehensible input that leads to language acquisition. For the input to be comprehensible, it shouldn't be too easy nor too difficult. It should be challenging and attainable. If the language input which is presented to the learner is too easy and below their level, there will be no development. If it is too difficult and beyond their level, learners will ignore it and eventually lose interest in learning. This means that second language acquisition teachers should pay attention to the input they present to the students, and they should make sure that it is not too easy nor too difficult. It should be within the learner's I+1. The last hypothesis is the affective filter hypothesis. This hypothesis indicates that there are emotional factors that affect language acquisition either positively or negatively. In order to boost acquisition, negative emotions should be filtered out and positive emotions should be encouraged. Thus, the affective filter stands for emotional barriers or negative emotions that stand in the way of acquisition, such as lack of motivation, stress, negative attitudes towards the language, or negative attitudes towards the teacher, lack of self-confidence, fear, and anxiety, to list but a few. These negative emotions prevent learners from understanding comprehensible input and consequently block the process of language acquisition. In second language acquisition classrooms, teachers need to lower the affective filter by increasing learners' motivation and eliminating any environmental factors that may cause learners fear, anxiety, and discomfort. The following figure presents a summary of Krashen's monitor model. It shows that the comprehensible input has to go through the affective filter and then be sorted out by cognitive organizers, which determine whether to use acquisition processes or learning processes to store the internalized intake. Finally, the monitor works as an editing device whenever the learner wants to produce some language output. Krashen has presented an appealing model for second language acquisition that attracted the attention of most second language acquisition professionals. This theory has been a major contribution to the development of the communicative language teaching method. However, the monitor theory started to lose much of its sparkle as different forms of criticism started to appear, mainly because most of these hypotheses were difficult to test and prove. The first limitation that was identified in this theory is the impossibility of distinguishing between acquisition and learning at the empirical level. We cannot identify which parts of the language the learners have learned and which ones they have acquired. The second criticism is that it attributes the success in acquisition of language to the comprehensible input alone, thus ignoring the role of the active engagement of the learner through their activity, effort, and attention. Another problem in Krashen's monitor theory is that it ignores individual differences among learners. What is comprehensible input for some learners may be too difficult for another group of learners and too easy for others. In short, the quest for a more comprehensive second language acquisition method is still going on, and we will pursue it in the next video with the social constructivist theory of second language acquisition. See you then.